Hello and welcome to this edition of the Deep Dive Perspective, a show in which we try to address those issues which often the mainstream media skips and dodges. What we are focusing on today is the Palestine question, but from a slightly different perspective, that of the media. What has the media's role been in relation to Palestine? But what are the roles of these institutions, political and media, in terms of really doing anything substantial for Palestine? It's been decades, of course, that this whole issue has been rumbling. With me, not in the studio, but online, is our dear friend Ken Loach, who needs no introduction, award-winning filmmaker, but political activist and a long-time supporter of the cause of Palestine. Welcome to the show, Ken.
Thanks very much. Very nice to see you, Mohsin. You just catch me. I think I'm about to cough.
Well, we know you've been not so well, so we wish you well, and I do hope that your recovery is quick and full. But thank you so much for joining us in spite of that. And this question of Palestine and the media. You're a filmmaker. You've been in this business for as long as anybody can remember, really, and part of the old guard of those who voiced concern for Palestine and have supported it. But you've seen what's been unfolding over the last 2 years. How is this different from what you saw in those early days, first of all?
Well, in substance, it's the same. In intensity, it is greater as the situation gets more desperate. I think it's what it is marked by is the imbalance in use of language, in the people chosen to speak, in the way the issues are prioritized, in the issues that are not raised at all. And I can be more specific about those, if you like. I think for example, take the easy example of today, of the situation now. The genocide in Gaza and the racist system of apartheid in the West Bank and elsewhere, and the whole tenor of what is happening in this situation. Well, first of all, it is generally accepted in the media, and the BBC is the gold standard. So what they say is seen as acceptable. Now, this began on October 7th. That's a lie. We know it didn't.
Sure.
It began a century ago, intensified when Israel was created with the ethnic cleansing, and even if you don't bother with that, the illegal occupation by international law, the illegal occupation of Palestinian territory, that is never accepted. That is never the benchmark of how to judge this situation. Further, military law, the daily disruption. Further, the settlements, illegal. They've been demanded to be removed, ignored. That underpins everything. It's the illegality of Israel's right, of the Palestinians' right to self-defense. They have the right to physically, by force, remove people who occupy their land. We all do. We celebrate the Free French. We celebrate the partisans, not the Palestinians. They're terrorists. So that's a key point. Not acknowledging the illegality of the Israeli presence. Israel has a right to defend itself. No, it doesn't. Not in the West Bank, not in East Jerusalem, not in Gaza. They are breaking the law being there. They have no right to defend Israel in that stolen land.
Well,
clearly, by international law. And that's just the beginning.
So the BBC, I mean, as the gold standard, don't acknowledge genocide at the moment. They aren't allowed into any of the war zone or the kill zone or the death camp, whatever way you want to describe it. And they also are at great pains to constantly push this whole notion of a conflict as if this is some kind of even struggle. How do you consider the coverage, the way that particularly Western media, mainstream media, has covered these 2 years?
As I say, the key questions they do not ask. They don't challenge when all the politicians line up from Starmer onwards to the right. Israel has the right to defend itself. That's the key question. They don't have that right. They don't have that right to defend Israel on Palestinian land. They are thieves. So they don't have that right. He's not challenged on that. You're right. It's seen as a war, but it isn't a war. It's a one-sided massacre. There's the country referred to Hamas as terrorists. Well, Hamas is a part of the resistance. If you accept that, you do not have to accept every act that the resistance does or everything they do. You don't have to accept that. If there are atrocities, then call them out. Absolutely, most resistance movements have committed atrocities, and there's no difficulty in calling those out and saying that was wrong. And in this, if the actions of Hamas on October 7th are proved in a court to be true, if they're true, well, they're abominable. No difficult in saying that.
Well,
but they get compared to the conscious starvation, the withdrawal of food, electricity, water from the Palestinians as a people is horrendous, and illegal. So there's no difficulty in saying what is we approve and what we don't.
Well, that's interesting that you raise Hamas and you raise the October 7th question as well, because that was the main focal point of even non-mainstream Western media. So I'll give an example. For instance, Piers Morgan was very much about do you support Hamas, and really focusing on October the 7th as almost the beginning of this whole conflict. He's changing his tune now, increasingly, having witnessed the kind of the disproportionality, as he puts it. But the fact is also this, and this often doesn't come out, that Hamas have already said that whatever happened on October the 7th, they're happy to lay everything out on the table. They're happy to create an inquiry where they would be willing to accept any wrongdoings that they'd done. This is not reported in Western media. They'll never say this. And conversely, Israel have refused any analysis of the October the 7th, and we also know that something called the Hannibal Directive was initiated, was basically triggered by Benjamin Netanyahu, and there are all sorts of questions about the security systems and why the response was so slow, 5 or 6 hours, and who killed these people, and the arrangement, for instance, of the festival. There was a music festival going on in that border. There are so many questions, but it's Israel which is saying it doesn't want to talk about October the 7th in detail. Hamas is saying, let's have an inquiry. That's a really interesting angle. What do you think about October the 7th from that perspective?
Well, I mean, that's what I was careful to say. If the events are proved in a court of law, I mean, that's exactly agreeing with what you say. The evidence has to be brought, and in all cases, these are legal requirements. Bring them to the courts. I mean, bring the evidence to the court, International Court of Justice. Let the evidence be heard. Let it be tested. Let the accusations be thoroughly researched, and then a judgment should be made. by the people of from a court speaking for the whole world. And that's it. All we can rely on is the evidence when it has been properly interrogated and presented. And then the court should make its judgment. And as you say, both sides need to present the evidence. But what is clear is that there is no moral parity, it seems to me, between a crime committed one night, even if it will prove to be horrendous, there's no moral parity between that and the conscious starvation, massacres, mutilation, destruction of a whole people carried over 2 years. I mean, there can be no moral parity between the two in their thoughts. Probably if the numbers proposed by the medical journal in Britain, the Lancet, said between the direct deaths maybe 60, 70,000. The indirect deaths would be 3 to 15 times that. So that could be, well, 250,000 to 500,000, who knows? And add to that the appalling mutilations. Who's going to look after that? Children without limbs, needing constant, artificial limbs that grow with them. Who's going to do that?
Well, it's a litany of barbaric terrorism, really. And I think using that word terrorism, again, the media likes to control narratives, and words are important. The story, how you tell the story is important. You know better than anybody else. But the story that's been coming out from Western media is very, very different from the story which is being told by Palestinian journalists with their own video cameras, and Palestinian journalists who haven't actually been employed in the main by Western media, who've been ignored and have been the victims of well over 150 deaths, targeted killings of these journalists, an unprecedented number of journalists killed. In fact, apparently some reports say that the First and Second World War together didn't have this number of journalists killed. This is another first. There are many firsts that Israel's achieving in this. I mean, Gaza now has a first in terms of the number of amputees, the number of child amputees, the number of children that are killed within that period of time. All of these wonderful achievements that Israel is manifesting, I'm not sure that mainstream media has really done justice to those victims of this genocide. I agree it's a genocide, but even that's a huge ask for Western media to call it that. The BBC won't call it that, and certainly the British establishment, the political establishment, won't call it a genocide. So this business of language, how do you feel about the way language has been used by even those who say they support Palestine or are sympathetic to them?
Yes, well, it's as you say, it's the use of words is very important. Legal and illegal, criminal, war crimes, genocide, they're all contested. Terrorism, state terrorism, they will not use individual terrorism. There is no such thing, apparently no such thing as state terrorism. It's interesting and unfortunate for our media, and particularly for the BBC, that a parallel of an invasion of another country is happening in parallel. It's in Ukraine, Russia and Ukraine. Russia, imagine giving Russia the preeminence that Israel is given in our media. I mean, it's unthinkable.
Yes.
You know, the BBC correspondent there, his reports are loaded with adjectives and attacks on Russia. And it's quite clear where he stands. By contrast, the Israeli invasion, which is a far more consciously vicious attack on civilians in every possible respect, the humiliation, the torture of them. We can just spend the whole time enumerating the assault on civilians. what we call a genocide, that is a genocide, that is, by comparison, Israel is constantly being interviewed, Israelis. Palestinian politicians, almost never. Very rare. The international organizations, yes, they have to be heard. They can't, the media can't suppress them. But it is only the Palestinians are seen as victims. There's never a sense of their rights, never a sense of their potential strength, never a sense of world opinion. And the shadowy, America is allowed to remain shadowy in the background. But let's remember, Trump and the Americans, and before them, the government, the president before, were signing a blank check for Israel to pursue this. So Israel is a client of the US. And that is never spelled out clearly. Sometimes they will say, well, somebody will say, well, Trump could end this in one phone call. Well, it might take him a few, but he could certainly just cut the aid. One thing, again, that is never suggested or never put forward, never discussion about, is the Genocide Convention. Now, under that, our government, every signatory, has to, by law, prevent genocide by every means. And it is illegal, you're committing an international crime if you do not prevent that genocide. We are clearly breaking that Genocide Convention legal obligation. We have no sanctions against Israel. There could be total economic sanctions, of course, ending all arms supplies, but ending all trade. We could close, we could say no germs there. Nothing allowed to get there by a circuitous route. Any country that sells on our products, we will sanction too. We could get the ambassador packing. We could make alliances so that all trade was suspended, absolutely isolated. And from the intense to the ridiculous, what are they doing in the European Song Contest? I mean, most countries are fortunate not to be part, but Israel is. It's not in Europe. How come they're in the European? How about the European football? Why are they in European competitions? They're North Africa. It's a North African region. And I'll not drop a name here. A great friend, Eric Cantona, spoke just a few days ago at a concert, a big concert for Palestine. He said he spoke of the number of Palestinian footballers who'd been killed by Israel and demanded that Israel takes no part in European football. It should be isolated from all sports. Russia is isolated from the Olympics. Why not Israel? Its crimes are much greater.
Well, it's an important point you raise, this comparison between the Ukraine-Russian conflict and Israel and, of course, its kind of genocide of Palestinians, because you're absolutely right that it's, again, the media's framing of the two conflicts is very different. And also, maybe I can bring in other establishments. The United Nations, for instance, they immediately ratified sanctions against Russia. They were excluded from all these sports, as you rightly say. They were excluded from many arenas. So it's clear that the United Nations and this supposedly international community can take action very rapidly in some cases, but in this case that doesn't seem to have happened, and it could be said that the media, the Western media, has almost acted as a soft power arm of the Israeli establishment, because they've been parroting most of the hasbara or the propaganda narratives that directly Mossad and the Israeli government have been giving them. And there's also been this huge furore of the connection between Zionists and Zionist movements, the global Zionist movement, Israel, Mossad, had with institutions that exist here in Britain, for instance, and of course in America, IPAC in America, but increasingly here, Keir Starmer and his government are being implicated with the notion of bias or prejudice towards Israel, because actually embedded within the Labour Party and government right now is a strong Zionist influence, if not an actual physical presence within the actual party itself. You were, if I can put it this way, you were witch hunted during the rise of Keir Starmer, and one of the early, if you like, victims or the martyrs on the cause. How has Starmer turned out subsequently, and what are your feelings about how that's all rolled out, given what you've seen over his initial period in office? What's your thought about the relationship between Keir Starmer, Zionism, and Israel, the way things have been shaping up?
Well, it's as you say, it is a constant threat, and the documentaries on Al Jazeera about the Labour Party are very clear and expose what's happened, and the Labour Labour Jewish organisations in Labour are covers for strong pro-Israeli positions, and the have in their constitution, I believe, I'll have to check it, that Israel has a special place in their hearts. Now, whether it's in one of their organisations. And I believe that members of the Starmer's cabinet certainly it was very clear that they should join Labour Friends of Israel. One of them was chair of Labour Friends of Palestine, but I think she stayed very quiet about that, and I think is now a member of Labour Friends of Israel. So I mean the move to that is very clear. When I was suspended for I'd spoken at a Labour Against the Witch Hunt campaign, which began, I'm afraid, under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, where I think there was a few retreats that shouldn't have been made, and one or two people were expelled during that time as well. So the witch hunt began there, in the hope of settling the attacks from the pro-Israeli groups, but sadly, predictably to some of us, they kept asking for more, and so that didn't work. I spoke at one meeting in favour of a very good activist who had been expelled for some notional reason, which was quite false. Spoke from Chris Williamson, who again had his words were totally. He was accused of saying the opposite of what he'd said, and the recording demonstrates it. But no matter who cares, the truth didn't spoil the good story, and so he was expelled. He wouldn't back down, and this other guy who was Wandsworth, is his first name, good man. He was expelled. I spoke on a platform with him, and then when Starmer was there, I was told that that group was proscribed. He weren't allowed to join it or afraid to act, and anybody who had supported it in retrospect, they would also be suspended. Now, the idea of a retrospective law is not a legal good practice, but I didn't bother our legal expert leader, Starmer, and some of us were suspended under that. And I was suspended, and I didn't bother to reply. And it was like ending an abusive relationship, to be honest. It was a great relief not to have the Labour Party on your back and wage war within it. So, they are an unprincipled bunch Starmer is an opportunist. His principles, he's like he's a Marxist, but unfortunately the Groucho tendency, as they say. These are my principles. If you don't like them, I have some more in my back pocket. He's an opportunist, shallow, and is in very little political sense of how to speak to people. I would think his leadership will not last. But nevertheless, the orientation of the Labour Party, I don't see it changing much. There might be a few different words. I mean, his pro-Palestinian words are just a tactic. He hasn't done anything that would have a serious effect. Nothing. They had an arms fair, and he banned the Israeli officials. The Israeli companies were still selling arms in Britain. He does a bit of window dressing, gets a headline, but he does nothing in reality. He's the man to charlatans.
Well, the left has been your love, and you've been, both in your films, you've been very social justice orientated, and a lot of your movies, very acclaimed movies, award-winning movies, have all been about fighting for the I guess, the oppressed in one way, shape, or form. And
it's a class issue. I'm an old-fashioned left. I believe in the class struggle.
Sure. And, movies like Keir's, etc. I mean, as a youngster, I watched that back in the 70s, and it had a massive emotional effect, just as a young boy myself. So people can relate to those stories and those narratives. And people thought that the Labour Party, and that's where its origins were, post-Second World War, that it pushed the welfare system, it was driving for justice, it was looking for equality. It seems as though it's completely lost its way now, and the gap or the void that is being left, because nobody expects anything from the right. The Reform are just a sort of a dressed-up, suited version of the British National Party for many of us, and of course, they are very likely to perhaps even come into power. That's how British politics, how far to the right British politics has moved over the years. But you'd have thought that the left could have been a bulwark against this. But again, it seems that Keir Starmer has chosen to be Blairite and Thatcherite essentially, and so he's shifted well over to what was the right. And as far as the left goes, in what's remaining of it, you have Jeremy Corbyn, who, of course, you must be following very carefully the developments of the Your Party, and at the other extreme, of course, is well, not extreme, but what I'd call the old hard left is George Galloway and people like Chris Williamson, who you mentioned earlier. So, but it seems as though the left is very much in disarray in that sense, because Zara Sultana and Jeremy Corbyn seem to have fallen out and not quite getting their act together. Do you see, in terms of Palestine, an impact of this failure of the real left, as I would call it, to be able to galvanise and create a real opposition to this kind of shift to the right? Do you think there's a failure that's going on, and is that likely to continue?
Well, there's a number of ideas in there that I just have to try and work through briefly. I mean, first of all, the Labour Party itself. There was a struggle early on between a party that understood and represented the interests of the working class, and the what we call the Social Democrats, who believed that you could manage capitalism in the interest of the people. And unfortunately, it was the latter version that managed capitalism was the way forward for the Labour Party. And you saw that right early on, and it's been the same ever since. In 1926, the general strike, biggest industrial strike we've had in the country, general strike. It was the miners again who were the centre of it, because of attacks by the coal owners on their wages and conditions. And the Labour Party did not back the miners, and it did not back the general strike. It walked away. And that was Ramsay MacDonald, and he's been excoriated ever since. But that's a substantial problem with the Labour Party. There's a contradiction at its heart of its politics. It says its politics are that you have to support a system in which private companies make profits. The profits are then taxed, and they supply your public services. Growth, we hear it every day. Private capital must grow and make profit. How does it make its profit? By exploiting the working class. So you're supporting an economic system that in its nature has to exploit workers. And you're meant to be the party of the workers. And that fundamental contradiction is at the heart of everything. Even the 1945 high point of the social democratic movement, with the nationalisation of NHS, nationalised public industries, housing, council housing, and so on. Its reason, when you look back, really was to provide a healthy, well-housed, working force to restore the country after the war, and it did. And it's couched in the language of socialism, some of it. And if you interpret it literally, it would mean a socialist economy. But of course, they never did. And Blair actually abolished a key clause, the old clause 4. So at the heart of Labour, throughout all its governments, throughout its parliamentary party, it has had this contradiction which cannot be resolved. And every Labour leader, when the mines were on strike in 1984, Kinnock and Hattersley, the leaders, they walked away. They walked away and attacked the miners' leader. And the same was true of the other unions. So that's the key thing at its heart. And of course, Starmer's Blair pushed it further to the right, but its base was private companies must make profits. And Starmer is the same. And the only one to oppose that was Jeremy Corbyn. And he's the best Labour leader has been for that reason. But the Starmer pushes it more and more to the right. The Chancellor is never, is entirely pro-corporate power. And that's the fundamental point. I mean, in terms of the representation for Palestine, again, the left and with Sarah and Jeremy, they have to go to the root of this attack. They have to call out the states for their support. They have to demand the arrest of the Israeli government, and they also have to start obeying the Genocide Convention. And I haven't heard too much of it, but I'm sure they would stand for it if questioned. But I think we have to make more of that. We need to put on the political agenda, obey the Genocide Convention to the letter and to the spirit, and that advances the dialogue. And also, and I think this is really something we're learning, that in the genocide, that it has never been so clear before, even in my lifetime, is that the United Nations is broken unless it abolishes the veto, unless it abolishes the Security Council. Yeah. There is no special power to the states that were claiming victory in the Second World War. That's 80 years ago. We need a General Assembly where all countries are represented according to their size and get a fair representation. And then the majority, maybe a high majority is called for, but in whatever way, that General Assembly has the power to make the judgments of the international courts effective with a real peacekeeping force. So if Gaza were to reoccur, the United Nations would have the right. It is my suggestion. I don't know about anyone else.
Sure. No, very good. This is fascinating. Yep.
A lesson where you learn from the thing. We have to make international law enforced. It's the old problem with international law. There are no sanctions. Well, that's the point of the United Nations. You have international law, you have these various conventions, you have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It means nothing if countries can ignore it. There has to be a serious peacekeeping force to which all countries have to contribute.
Yeah.
And if the court decides that's the law, then, my God, the peacekeeping force has to go in and say, right, you've got a warning. Now stop the war crimes, or we shall invade. And go in and stop it, and have the military power to do that. Otherwise, the law counts for nothing. The law counts for nothing.
You've come up with some fascinating solutions, because I think we do need to talk about solutions, given the abject failure of international institutions in the way that genocide has been dealt with in Gaza. The light definitely shines on the United Nations. We've done that a few times. Also, many other institutions, the ICJ, for instance, the ICC, who have actually more or less condemned Israel, have demanded criminal, cases be brought against them. Yet there seems to be no ability to implement or act on any of this. So this toothless tiger, the UN, in a sense, could be condemned as that. So your idea of reforming the United Nations is something I think globally would be a very, very popular exercise. The Africans are saying, why aren't we amongst those who can veto issues? I don't think there should be a veto. As I rather agree with you. I think that the proportional representation of all the people of the world and a kind of a non-veto based UN with a military force sounds very, very attractive, given that it could go in and stop at least these kinds of atrocities. But of course, who's going to be able to bell the cat? Because the Americans, of course, hold everybody to ransom with the dollar and their control of the petrol industries and their control of West Asia. And of course, they seem to want to support Greater Israel as the policeman in the region by expanding its occupation in Syria. It's in Syria now. It's bombing Syria, even though they've got agreements going on with the former Al-Qaeda leader, al-Julani. Some say he's a US asset. The other issue is, of course, that they want a war in Iran. They want war against Yemen. They want war against Lebanon. They want to wipe up Hezbollah. So they're engaged in bombing at least 7 countries in the region. They seem to be openly talking about a greater Israel, which is the Yinon plan, going from where Israel is now, right up to the Euphrates and even into the Sinai in Egypt. And it seems as though those in power at the moment, the Smodriches, the Ben-Gavirs, the Netanyahus, they are actually on board with this whole concept and idea. With looking at that scenario, how do you see the possibility of peace or justice being achieved in West Asia? Do you think it's going to go the other way? Because it seems as though the drums of war being beaten in Tel Aviv are very, very loud, and they're reaching Washington. And if that happens, then you've got a huge intercontinental ballistic missile warfare possibility. You've got the possibility of nuclear weapons. The Samson option is there for Israel, which apparently has a Samson option but doesn't really have nuclear weapons. It never gets admitted to, and the Americans don't admit it's got nuclear weapons, even though everybody knows they've got nuclear weapons. So again, going back to the media, has Western media also done a good enough job on exposing this entire, warmongering agenda? I mean, these are all questions.
Well, I think you hear speculation, but I think in a way we have to start campaigning for the idea, and I think in the end, if it means, America's power comes from its economic strength, and that has to be, and we have to make alliances and gradually find other economies that we join, and we rid ourselves of this dominance of American power, so that it doesn't have this international weight because of its economic strength. And once you have done that, then they get weaker. I'm going to have to go, I'm afraid.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Ken. We've run out of time. I know we're also on time, but thank you so much for joining us and some fascinating insights. And to the audience, you've heard Ken's views, very sensible, logical, humane angles, common sense angles, really. It baffles me as to how Western media often manages to ignore many of these arguments which Ken has made, which just are absolute human civilizational common sense ones. One would hope that institutions like the BBC and all those powerful agencies which are not state-run, for instance, the Murdoch network, one can't expect much from Rupert Murdoch and those corporate media outfits which have a vested interest in the kind of Anglo-Zionist imperialism, some would say, around the world. But what one does expect, certainly from state media, is some level of fairness and some counterbalance to all of the other Hasbara and propaganda and imperialist kind of triumphalism which we often hear. We can only carry on doing what we do, which is to bring voices like Ken onto the platforms as well. And we hope that social media wins the day, and the algorithms behind the social media don't shut us up and allow these voices to speak fairly and loudly to the world. Because quite frankly, with the way the world is heading, it doesn't seem like a good place. Economic meltdown, wars, conflicts, poverty, famine, disproportionate economic realities still seem to be very much on the agenda of those in power and those pushing for more power. Do like, share, and subscribe to our channel. It's important for us because that's the only way we can continue and provide some of these alternate voices a platform to speak. Thank you once again to Ken Loach, and look forward to maybe doing it again sometime. Wish you good health. Take care, and to the audience, goodbye. Thank you.